You know that you are going to die, not the way you know facts about distant countries, in your bones, since you were a child, and you'll carry it until the last moment. But here's a question almost no one stops to ask. When your dog sleeps in the sun, when an elephant walks the savannah, is some quiet part of them whispering the same thing? Or are you in a strange, lonely club of one? The answer is stranger and darker than you'd think. Because when scientists finally went looking for the answer, they didn't find a simple yes or no. They found a whole spectrum of creatures reacting to death, some with what looks like cold chemistry, some with something that looks agonizingly like a broken heart, and one line that so far only you seem to have crossed. Scientists built a whole field to chase it down with a haunting name: comparative thanatology, the study of how animals respond to death. And the first thing it found is that they are not indifferent, not even close. Take elephants. When a herd comes across one of their own dead, they don't simply move on. They stop. The whole group goes quiet, the way a room goes quiet. Then they reach out with their trunks and touch the body. Again and again. The face, the mouth, the tusks, the way you might touch the hand of someone you can't believe is gone. They rock. They stand guard. Some have been seen covering the body with branches and soil, as if they can't stand to leave it exposed. They may stay for hours. And here's the detail that unsettles even the researchers. They do this for bare bones and ivory too, long after the flesh is gone, running their trunks over a skull, turning it, lingering, while walking straight past the bones of other animals as if they were stones. They seem to know whose bones these are. Whatever that recognition is, it looks a great deal like remembering. And elephants have been recorded returning to those places years later to stand in the same spot again. But before you decide that looks like understanding, science forces a colder question on you. And it comes from somewhere you'd never expect: an anthill. Because there is a form of response to death in nature that has nothing to do with feeling at all. When an ant dies, its body starts to release a chemical called oleic acid as it breaks down. And the moment other ants smell it, they pick the corpse up and carry it out to a refuse pile away from the colony. Simple, tidy, efficient. Here's the experiment that should make you shiver. If you take a perfectly healthy, living ant and dab a tiny drop of that same chemical on it, the other ants will carry it out to the dead pile too, kicking, alive, protesting the whole way. And they'll keep doing it again and again until the chemical wears off. To that ant, there is no death, no grief, no meaning. There is only a smell that says, "Remove this." That is the floor of the spectrum. A response to death with zero understanding behind it. Pure reflex dressed up to look like a funeral. So the real challenge isn't finding animals that react to death. It's proving that any of them mean anything by it. And that challenge gets genuinely eerie with crows. When a crow dies, other crows will gather around the body, dozens of them, calling loudly, forming a noisy crowd that researchers couldn't help but call a funeral. For a long time, people assumed that's exactly what it was: grief, a ceremony, a goodbye. But when a scientist named Kaylee Swift actually tested it, the truth turned out to be more unsettling and more brilliant. The crows weren't mourning, they were studying. They gather around a dead crow to memorize the place, the predator, the danger that killed it. And afterward, they avoid that spot. They remember the threat, and they treat it as a lesson. It isn't a heartbreaking. It's a mind taking notes at the scene of a death, so it doesn't end up as the next body on the ground. Which is somehow both less romantic and far more chilling. An animal that looks at death and instead of weeping, calculates. But then there are the mothers, and here's where it gets darker, because this is where the chemistry and the calculation fall away, and you're left with something you can't explain so cleanly. Primate mothers carry their dead infants for days, sometimes weeks, grooming them, carrying them, protecting them long after decay is set in, refusing at every level to accept that the small body in their arms is no longer their child. Chimpanzees have been seen doing something almost impossible to read without a lump in your throat. A group in Zambia gathered around a dead member, and one female used a stem of grass to carefully clean the dead one's teeth. A gentle, grooming-like act of care performed on a body that could never know or thank her for it. And then there are the orcas. A mother orca whose calf dies will push the body up through the water over and over, keeping it at the surface. In 2018, an orca the researchers called Talekwa carried her dead newborn for 17 days across more than 1,000 miles of ocean, diving to retrieve it every time it began to slip away, refusing to let it sink. 17 days! To anyone with a heart, it looks like exactly one thing, and the word rises up before you can stop it: grief. So that settles it. They understand death. And here's where we have to slow down and be honest, because this is the hardest part of the whole story, the part real science refuses to skip. There is a vast, quiet gap between feeling a loss and understanding the concept of death. Sit with what Tahlequah's grief might actually be. A mother reacting to something that has gone silent and still and wrong. A bond that suddenly gets no response is heartbreaking beyond words. But it is not the same as knowing that her calf is permanently gone, that death is universal, that it comes for every orca in the sea, and that one day it is coming for her. She may be drowning in loss without holding a single one of those ideas in her mind. And that distinction is everything. Because grief, the raw pain of absence, may be scattered all across the animal world. Elephants, orcas, primates, and likely far more creatures than we know. But the cold, abstract knowledge that death is inescapable, that it is your own certain future, carried with you on ordinary afternoons when nothing is wrong at all. That has never been demonstrated in any other creature on Earth. Not one. They may feel death when it lands in front of them. There's no evidence they see it coming for themselves. And here's why that line is so maddeningly hard to cross with any certainty. You cannot ask them. You can't sit an elephant down and ask whether it understands that it too will one day be bones in the grass. Every clue we have is behavior. A touch, a vigil, a body carried too long. And behavior is exactly where the mind plays its cruelest trick on us. We are pattern matchers, built to see intention everywhere, to read a face onto a cloud and a soul into a machine. So when we watch a mother orca cradle her dead calf, we pour our own understanding of death straight into her, and we genuinely cannot tell how much of what we see is her and how much is us. This is the trap researchers fight every single day, and it cuts both ways. Assume too much, and you invent a grieving philosopher out of an animal running on instinct. Assume too little, and you might be staring directly at genuine understanding and dismissing it as reflex simply because it doesn't come wrapped in human words. The honest scientist has to stand in that exact uncomfortable place, moved by what they're seeing and refusing to claim they know what it means. And from that careful, humble position, the verdict so far still holds. Rich evidence of grief, and not one clean case of an animal that knows its own death is coming. And that gap leads somewhere lonely, arguably the loneliest place in all of biology. Because if animals can mourn, but never truly know, then you may belong to the only creature that spends its entire existence aware of its own ending. Think about what that actually means, moment to moment. The deer doesn't dread the winter of its life. Your dog doesn't count its years, doesn't feel them running out, doesn't lie awake doing the math. They live inside an endless present, where death is something that happens to others, a shape in the grass, a danger to flee, but never a date quietly circled somewhere in their own mind. You don't get that mercy. You have carried the ending with you since you were old enough to understand it, folded into every birthday, every goodbye, every glance at a clock. Even human children don't arrive knowing it. They piece the concept together slowly, usually somewhere around the age of 7, the day it finally lands that death is permanent, that it happens to everyone, and that everyone includes the people they love and includes them. That is the moment a child stops being, in one specific way, like every other animal on the planet, and they never get to go back. And here's the final turn, the one that reframes everything you've watched so far. That terrible knowledge, the thing that isolates you from every other creature alive, may be the very thing that made you human in the first place. A group of psychologists spent decades building the case for it, and their argument is staggering: that a huge share of everything your species has ever created grows from a single unbearable root: knowing you will die and being unable to simply live with it. They found that when you quietly remind people of their own mortality, they cling harder to their beliefs, their groups, their sense of meaning, as if the mind, faced with the void, instinctively reaches for something that will outlast it. Look at what we build: religion, promising the story doesn't really end; art, monuments, pyramids, cathedrals, objects designed to outlive the hands that made them. The desperate, universal human need to be remembered, carve a name into something, to leave a mark that says, I was here. An animal that didn't know it would die would never need a single one of those things. It wouldn't build a monument. It wouldn't pray. It wouldn't ache to be remembered, because it wouldn't know there was anything to be remembered against. The very knowledge that haunts you may be the engine behind everything your species has ever made. The wound and the masterpiece, the same thing. So, do animals know they're going to die? The honest answer, after all of it, is layered and strange. They respond to death, sometimes as pure chemistry, like the ant carrying out a body it cannot mourn. Sometimes as cold study, like the crow memorizing a threat. And sometimes in the elephants and the orcas and the mothers who will not let go, as something that looks heartbreakingly like our own grief. But the knowledge of their own death, carried through every ordinary day the way you carry yours, has never been found in any of them. Which means the question was never really about animals at all. It was about you. You are one of the only things that has ever lived knowing exactly how the story ends and choosing to keep living anyway. To love people you know you'll lose, to build things you know you won't see finished, to plant trees whose shade you'll never sit in. The elephant touches the bones and walks on, into a present with no shadow over it. You carry the shadow everywhere you go. You are the animal that knows. And out of that knowing, out of that single, lonely, unbearable fact, you build a world. Nothing is as ordinary as it looks.